And I am grateful that I still have all my faculties and that I'm still capable, and that other than experiencing some symptoms that like kind of derail me sometimes, that I'm still doing things as normal, at least most things as normal.
So most people don't know me. I just started making these videos after being diagnosed with brain cancer. My name is Jasmine. I am 37, almost 38. My birthday is in just a few weeks. And I have been surviving a cancer diagnosis since I really don't know how or when I was considered diagnosed, but we found the lesion on my brain in April of 2023. And so I wanted to come and kind of share this journey with you guys and give you some background. The main reason I'm doing this is to encourage people to advocate for themselves in every situation, but definitely in your health. I lost my mom to cancer pretty swiftly when I was 17, almost 18 years old. I was a senior in high school. And very different cancer and not hereditary. And then my husband was actually diagnosed with cancer about 9 years ago. And his diagnosis took some fighting. Like, the doctors absolutely refuted that anything was wrong with him. And I'll say I was letting him go to his appointments by himself, and we weren't seeing any progress. And so I finally was like, you know what? I'm going to your appointment with you. And I went to the appointment with him, and I stood my ground, and I asked for some diagnostic testing that they absolutely did not want to do. And the day after the imaging was done, they called to tell us that he had a golf ball size tumor. Also a very different cancer, not hopefully not related, maybe environmental, who knows, but not related to my cancer. But it's just like, wow, what are the odds? You know, at the time of his diagnosis, he hadn't even hit 30 yet, so he was still in his late 20s. And then I got diagnosed shortly after turning 36. I believe, if my math is mathing. So yeah, I just want to share that message and make people aware that, the health system has lots and lots of smart people. But you are the expert of your body and your health. And when you think something is wrong, you have every right to push for answers. So to understand my journey takes us going back a couple of years before my diagnosis. So back in 2021, I was pregnant with our third child. Like, still in the midst of the pandemic, the vaccines had just come out, and life was still relatively chaotic. I mean, look, life is chaotic now, but we were still like in so still in the throes of the pandemic. I was pregnant, and the vaccine ended up coming out. And I remember, I had midwives, and they were like, oh, are you going to get vaccinated? We recommend that you do. And, want to protect you and the baby. And I am a huge advocate for health. Like, I work in healthcare, and have worked in like public and community health for most of my professional career. And so I absolutely believe in the power of vaccines. If certain vaccinations and medications were around some 20 years ago when my mom passed away, she may still be alive today. But I say all that to say that, I ultimately decided to wait until I was out of my first trimester, and then get the vaccination.
And so this was, I don't know, late summer, like maybe early summer. It may have been around June or July.
But I ended up getting vaccinated. First shot, absolutely nothing wrong. After the second shot, I started having like weird symptoms, and honestly, I can't remember what they were. I know that I felt like my eyes couldn't focus. And I know that was nystagmus. I was having like shortness of breath and heart palpitations and like tingling in my hands and feet. And this all happened within like 5 to 10 days of me receiving the second dose of my shot. And so once again, I don't have all the details, because I can't recall from memory. Like, I wasn't putting this stuff together at the time. But I do remember telling my care team, like, hey, think I'm having adverse reactions to the shot. I'm not feeling well. Like, something feels off. And they're like,
The response I received was, oh no, if it was the vaccination, you would have had some kind of like reaction after the first dose. And that the likelihood is that you're geriatric. Yes, I was 35 at the time, if I think. That you have 2 other kids at home and it's a pandemic and you guys are like in close quarters. I lived in a 2,300 square foot house, and we all had our own rooms with a living room, family room, and a basement. It's not like we were on top of each other, right? So there was that. And then they were like, oh, it's anxiety. We're pretty sure that after you have the baby, you'll be fine. And so I kept pressing, and they were like, oh, we'll run some additional tests. So, like, I've always been iron deficient anemic, for as long as I can remember. And my iron levels were always low. But they ran some additional tests, I believe. And, they checked, like, I believe my ferritin stores, and, they were so low that, they were non-detectable. So I ended up getting an iron infusion in like August of 2021-ish. I went to a cardiac specialist because I'm like, am I having some heart problems? Like, it just, what it felt like was, imagine like being on a roller coaster and going down a drop, but you don't feel the wind in your face. You just feel like your heart dropping into your stomach. I would get those kinds of sensations, which now that I am more aware was a part of the vertigo that I was experiencing.
So I tell you all of this to say that, my complaints were disregarded, that I had been experiencing this for a while, and that I was pretty much just continuously told, like, hey, you good. There's nothing wrong with you. You are having a baby and you're anxious and you're old and you'll be okay after this baby gets here. So baby came and I felt a little bit better. So like some of it may have been part of being pregnant and being exhausted or whatever. But I didn't feel myself. And so I kept telling them this, and I told them, like, my eyes feel like I can't focus. Like, I remember that being a chief complaint of mine for like ever. And I'm like, my eyes can't focus. And they're like, oh, well, pregnancy can change your vision, and so you should go get it checked out. And I've worn glasses for quite some time, but I have a very weak prescription, or I still have a very weak prescription, and have only really needed to wear my glasses when sitting in a classroom and looking at a board that's far away, driving at night because of having astigmatism, and just like seeing things from a distance. So I'm nearsighted, but like even my long distance vision was not terrible. But after I had this baby, like, I felt like my eyes just, or not after I had this baby, but after getting my vaccine, I felt like my eyes wouldn't focus, and that I was having a hard time, like, not seeing, like, it's hard to describe, but it just felt like my vision was not what it used to be. And I had always gone to like retail optometrists, so like like Lens Crafters and American's Best. And so I went to the optometrist like I usually do, and I got the cheap glasses because I don't wear them. And I told him what was going on, and he was just like, "Oh yeah, your prescription changed a little bit." He's like, "Your eyes are actually a little bit better." Okay. So got my new glasses, started wearing them, wore them for a couple weeks, called back like, "Hey, my vision still doesn't seem right." And he's like, "You probably just got to get used to them or whatever." And so I was like, "You know what, forget it, because this is going nowhere." So I started wearing my glasses like all the time because it felt like when I had them on, some of like the weirdness in the way that I was seeing seemed to like dissipate. It wasn't gone, but it felt more controlled, like, if that makes any sense.
So I went from this girl who absolutely never, ever, ever wore glasses, to somebody who basically sleeps in glasses. Like, I order 25 pair of cheap glasses, and I do not take them off. Like, I will fall to sleep in them, and my husband will take them off me at night. I don't have them on now because they have a glare protection for my computer on them, and they give off this weird green glow. And so I was like, I'm not gonna wear them for this video. But what was I trying to say? Yeah, when I had the glasses on, it seemed a little bit better. And so when my annual eye exam time came back around, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go to an ophthalmologist because I need like full on evaluation. So I went to the ophthalmologist, and she basically said that she was like, "Oh, the prescription you have is a little bit off. I think I'm gonna make a modification. It's not a whole lot. Like, I think it went from like a negative 0.75 to a negative 1." And she was like, "I don't see anything wrong with your eyes. So we're gonna change the prescription and see what happens." And so she changed my prescription. Nothing. When was this? This was in like December of 2022. So she changed my prescription. Same old deal. Like, still felt like my eyes weren't quite focused. Like, something was just like a little bit off, but I could not articulate like what was going on. So like, this whole thing is a very convoluted, say 6 months, not even 6 months, yeah, 6 months in 2023. So in February of 2023, I decided to get Invisalign. I have a little bit of crowding on my bottom teeth, and have for a long time like wanted to get it fixed. I don't know, I'm like a sucker for smiles, and really, like, I don't know, I just wanted a really straight smile. And so I went and got Invisalign, and it was much more involved than I thought it was going to be. They had to add these attachments. I can't remember what they're called for Invisalign, but they're like acrylic attachments or whatever that they put on your teeth. I even had like some metal ones for rubber bands, and I was just like, oh, I didn't know that I was signing up for this. So it was a lot, right? And so this happened in February.
I went back through my text messages and like started looking at stuff because it felt like the impetus of like what was about to unfold started around this time. So I don't have exact dates in front of me, but around a week or two later in February, I got a dizzy spell. And so did not feel good, thought I had food poisoning, right? So my husband wasn't feeling great either. I don't think he had like the vomiting vertigo, but his stomach wasn't feeling good. We had both eaten food that had these mushrooms in it, and my kids did not. And so I was like, oh yeah, he's not feeling great, I'm not feeling great, we both ate these mushrooms, nobody else ate the mushrooms, nobody else is feeling unwell, that's probably why we're not feeling great. And so attributed it to us both having food poisoning. He felt unwell like maybe a couple of days before I did. And both of us were sick for like less than 24 hours. So I remember not distinctly this instance, but I remember like with the sicknesses that I was experiencing, I would like wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and the room would be spinning, and not like not like just a little rotation. Like, I mean, like I stood outside and looked in the sky and spun around in circles like a 5 year old. And it would spin and spin and spin uncontrollably. And then I would get this terrible urge to have to vomit. And so it lasted, like the spinning sensation would probably be less than a minute, but like that nausea and just like not feeling well would last for like half a day. So for like 12 hours, I was on the bathroom floor, like just laying on the floor, trying to lay on the cold towel of the tub. But after 12 hours, I would start to feel better. The spinning would like start to subside. And so I was like, oh yeah, this is food poisoning. You know, it's only gonna last like a day or two and I'll be fine.
By the next day, I was back to normal. And so then that was in February, about almost a month exactly. It happened again in March. And so this time, and I distinctly remember this one, we had literally just gotten off of a plane from a family vacation. And so we grabbed some fast food, which we don't normally do. And we got my kids and my husband got Starbucks for breakfast, and I didn't really want Starbucks, and so I got a sausage and egg McMuffin from McDonald's. And within like 3 hours of me eating it, same thing. I was like, I don't feel good. I'm gonna go lay down. I felt that really bad, nauseated feeling. I laid down, and by the time I woke up, the world was spinning. Like everything was terrible. When throwing up, all that good stuff. And so once again, it lasted for like half a day. And by the next day, I felt like I was back to normal. And so I was like, oh gosh, well, I'm the only person who ate McDonald's, and it's definitely food poisoning. Like, I'm like, COVID precautions have been lifted. Like, because we hadn't been eating out anywhere during the pandemic because of fears of contamination and all that other stuff. And so I was like, restrictions have been lifted. They are probably hiring people left and right and not putting protocols in place to make sure that like people are adhering to like cleanliness and stuff. And so like, yes, it sucks, but I probably got like salmonella or some crappy kind of bacterial infection from people being gross. And so I was like, oh, we're not eating out no more. But chucked it up to it being food poisoning again. It was lunch, and I was the only person who ate it. And then it happened again, and I was like, I honestly think that that's when I was like, okay, we're not eating out anymore. But I was sick. I can't remember the exact timeline, like if it was the next day or if it was that later that evening. But I remember getting sick and getting nauseated and like being dizzy and feeling like crap. And once again, it lasted for like no more than a day. And by the next day, I was back in business. And so the next day, I actually had this business retreat to go on. And so I was at a hotel for a week. And, I did feel a little bit different this time. So I didn't feel terrible, but I didn't feel like 100% better this time around. But I was still like functioning and able to do everything that I needed to do. And so I went to this week-long retreat. Went to a retreat and attended all my meetings and my seminars and all that other good stuff. And then came home on a Friday. I distinctly remember that. And then Saturday at like 4 o'clock in the morning, only a week after the previous bout of vertigo and vomiting and all that other good stuff, it happened again. And so I woke up that morning and I'm like, room spinning, feel like crap. This ain't food poisoning. Like, I hadn't eaten anything I just could not correlate it with food poisoning this time. And then I was like, this is happening too frequently. There has to be something else going on. And I don't know what it is, but I'm going to find out. And so my big brother came over to the house. And I talked to him. And he was like, you should go to the ER. And I was like, you know what? I think you're right. And so he came over. and picked me up and took me to the hospital while my husband was with our children. I feel like my son may have had like a soccer game that day or something. And so, I went through the ER, sat in the room, and then they did like all the diagnostic type testing that they do, like taking your vitals and all the other stuff too. And so they started like shining these lights in my eyes, and they're like, "Oh, you have nystagmus. You've got downbeating nystagmus on this side and left to right nystagmus on the other side, and that's how we confirm that you're experiencing vertigo." I'm like, "Oh, is that what this is?" So when they elicited like the nystagmus response, you know how I mentioned that I was having a hard time focusing my eyes before? That's what was going on. So when I would look kind of like in my periphery, I would get this beating of my eyes, like this jerking of my eyes, which is what, I don't know if it's what causes the dizziness, but it kind of is a hint to a neurological concern. And so I realized that like by wearing my glasses, it restricted my field of vision, and so I would look straight more often to be able to look through the lenses instead of like looking all the way off to the left or all the way off to the right. I would turn my head to look those ways instead, and that is why it was controlling that sensation that I was having a hard time focusing and stuff. So I was experiencing nystagmus that the optometrist and the ophthalmologist and my doctors, none of them, I'm assuming, even checked for it, because like I don't recall being asked to do like to look into my peripheral by any of those people. But like that simple check may have shown that there was something going on back in 2021 when I first started experiencing it. So the nystagmus was enough to be like, okay, it's not gastrointestinal. We're gonna do some additional testing. So like they run some blood work, and then they also did some initial imaging, and so I got a CT scan of my brain. And on the CT scan of my brain, there was like this shadow deep in my cerebellum. And the doctors are like, "You have a lesion on your brain. We don't know what it is. It looks like a demyelinating disease, but it doesn't look like a stroke, but we can't rule that out. It could be traumatic brain injury. It could be a tumor. Like, we don't know." And they're like, "We're going to do some additional imaging just to confirm that this, like, artifact is actually there."
So the additional imaging was an MRI. And they ended up doing an MRI of my brain, and results concluded that there was indeed a lesion in my cerebellum, like deep in my cerebellum, as well as slightly touching my brainstem. And so they were like, "We're going to admit you, and keep you here under monitoring." And they took me to another unit. I can't remember what it was. It was like a neurology unit or something like that. And they were like, "We want to do a spinal tap to confirm that there are no abnormal cells in your spinal fluid. Are you okay with that?"
At this time, I'm essentially freaking out because they're like, "Oh, you might have MS or, whatever." And, but I'm like, yes, like, find out what's going on. But this has to be the worst experience that I could have had in my life. So two of my children, so I have 3 kids, 2 of my children I had epidurals with because they were both essentially induced. I had really long labors, like I think one was like 22 hours and the other one was like 28 hours. My third I had without anything. But the epidurals, at least from my understanding, were like a similar process to a spinal tap. And so I'm like, it's scary, but I'm going to get it done because I want to figure out what the heck is going on with me. So they send this resident in, and you can just tell that, like, this is probably her first spinal tap. And I mean, like, she's talking to me, but it sounds like she's reading information off of a pamphlet. She did not seem like she felt very sure of herself. I asked her some questions, and she gave just like really ambiguous answers. And understand, like, I know she's a doctor, she went to school for this, but I'm not here. I'm not personally here to be someone's guinea pig. Like, I guess she needs to learn, but I was in a lot of discomfort. I was scared as heck. And what I didn't want is somebody who is uncomfortable with a critical procedure doing something and effing up essentially and making what is already a bad situation worse. So I talked to my nurse and I'm like, I really don't feel good about this. Like, I want to get the spinal tap done, but my preference would be to have someone who's actually done this before. Like, when I asked her if she's ever done a spinal tap, she's like, oh, we do spinal taps all the time. That wasn't what I asked you. Like, I know that doctors do spinal taps, but once again, I could tell that she was not sure of herself, and that made me feel very uncomfortable. So, I ended up telling them, like, hey, I would prefer someone a little bit more familiar with the procedure to do it for me. Like, I feel like I should have that right? And they're like, oh yeah, her resident supervisor or whatever will do it or whatever. Like, I guess he was getting ready to finish his residency, and so he's done this before, and so they tell me he's gonna do it. And, when you get a spinal tap, like, they prep the area, you can't move, you face the other way. And so he comes in and he's talking to me about it. He's behind me, like, telling me what's going on and what's about to happen. And then I realized that it's this girl. Like, she's doing it anyway. And so they absolutely just disregarded everything that I said. And in that moment, like, or in that situation, I think they had started to prep me and she was getting ready to do it. And, like, I could feel her, like, shaking and just not feeling very comfortable. And that's when I brought that stuff up. And I think I had an anxiety attack at that time. Like, everything started spinning. My chest felt tight. I couldn't breathe. I have never, ever in my life experienced an anxiety attack. And so that is what prompted me to ask someone else to do the spinal tap. And so they assured me that this other resident was going to do it and that, he was, like, in the third year of his residency, and that he would, be taking control of the situation. And then they lied to me. Like, she did the spinal tap. But at that point, I was defeated. And I was already prepped. And I was like, you know what? We're just going to get this over with. And so I let her do it. Spinal tap came back completely normal. Cytology report, no abnormal cells. So I was relieved, and honestly thinking, like, hey, this can't be cancer. Like, there would be some abnormal cells in my cerebrospinal fluid. So yeah. So before they sent me to the unit where they admitted me to, they had told me that they were going to do a full spine MRI to ensure that there were no additional lesions anywhere else, and that they wanted to do it before they discharged me, because it would happen sooner than, if I went and got it as an outpatient service. So after the spinal tap, they're like, oh, we're about to discharge you. And I was like, oh, I thought that they were going to do some additional imaging. And then they're like, well, we can't do it right now or whatever. And they're like, we can keep you in here for a couple days. And I was like, no, like, I want to go back home to my kids. Let me go. So I ended up getting discharged without the MRI. I had to, like, call and schedule to get the MRI, and they couldn't do it for, like, a couple weeks. And I'm like, look here. I don't know what's going on with me. I might have a brain tumor or whatever. Like, I need to get it done sooner. And so I literally called back to imaging every single day until they got a cancellation appointment and I can get in sooner. So I think instead of it being like 3 weeks or whatever, 2 to 3 weeks that they wanted me to wait, I ended up getting in within that same week. So the full spine MRI came back normal other than the lesion on my brain. And the doctor, a neurologist, called me and he was like, we want to get you in for a biopsy because we won't know what this is until we have an opportunity to sample tissue. And I'm like, oof, a biopsy of my brain. And so this was at the end of April, like very, very end of April. So like towards the 30th-ish, I think is when I was discharged, maybe the 29th. And I got that MRI like in May. So by the second week of May is when he talked about me getting a biopsy. And so I didn't want to do it, but I mean, like, what the heck do you do? And so I scheduled the biopsy, and then like a week before the biopsy was supposed to happen, which was supposed to be like the first week of June, I get a phone call like, hey, that neurologist, that neurosurgeon that you talked to is going to be on vacation the week that you're scheduled for your surgery. So we need to reschedule your surgery. And that was just a moment. Like, I don't know. Like, I think I care about people too much because I could never see myself having the conscience to be like, oh, I have a major brain surgery to perform. However, I'm going to go ahead and take a trip. So we rescheduled it. And for like 2 weeks later or something like that, And then I got in my own head and started like going through my old notes and my old text messages. And then I realized that every single bout of vertigo that I experienced happened on a Tuesday. Like every single time. It's crazy. Every single time it was on a Tuesday. So remember I told you guys that I had gotten Invisalign back in February. And so my thinking brain was like, hey, I changed my liner Monday night before I go to sleep. And then about 8 hours, not even 8 hours later, about 5 hours later, after I changed my liner, guess what? I've been getting dizzy spells and vertigo. And usually, like, not every week, but every 3 weeks or so. So I'm like, oh, when I change my liner by week 3, I must be going to a really different, like, configuration. And this is probably just, like, migraines from my teeth shifting from the Invisalign. So I put this whole, because denial, right? So I hit up my PCP and I'm like, look, I don't think he knew much of anything about what was going on. The way that care is coordinated, and I mean, like, he is from a different health system than the one that I went to for emergency care, but like they don't communicate to one another, and like clearly I can only imagine that he has a lot of patients, right? But I would think that if one of your patients like potentially had brain cancer, that the health system that like treated them for that issue would somehow communicate with the PCP. Like, isn't it the whole point of having a PCP? But yeah, so I contacted him and was like, hey, I think there's some stuff going on. I've been getting vertigo, but then I see that like it lines up with when I changed my aligners with Invisalign. Could this be something? So I went into him for an appointment. He ended up like confirming that I had TMJ. And then he also like looked at my sinuses and stuff and was like, oh, your sinuses are really inflamed. I'm going to refer you to the ENT. I was like, jackpot, I got other people to look into this stuff. Maybe it's not brain cancer. Like, maybe it's, like, I was creating every kind of best case scenario that I could think of. I'm like, maybe this is inflammation from TMJ and migraines, and that like what they're seeing on these scans is not anything important, and that it'll resolve itself, and let me go to these other doctors and find out. So I went to the ENT. They did a scan of like my sinuses, and those came back fine. And so I also asked for a referral to an audiologist to get a balance test. And the health system that was treating me for the lesion could not get me in for like months, right? So I'm having dizzy spells and you can't see me for 90 days. So I was able to call a health system out of the area and they were able to get me in within a week. And so this, like, the timeline might not be making sense because I'm giving you all of this from memory. But I went in and got what they call a balance test and some vestibular testing done. And definitely had some stuff going on. And so the audiologist was like, you either have neuritis or there's something wrong with your brain. And so I was like, okay, that's inconclusive. Guess I'll get this biopsy. So I end up going to get the biopsy. I think it was like June 30th. So I had to be there at the crack of dawn. The surgery took hours. Like, I can't remember if it was like 9 or 13 hours, but it was a long time. I went in with 2 French braids. I wasn't really sure what to expect. Like, I talked to them about it, and they had mentioned that they were going to like cut this really small area and go in and remove the tissue. That ain't what they did. Like, I don't know if they told me that so that they wouldn't scare me. But I woke up and the left side of my head was shaved. I had 12 staples going down my skull. And then learned that I also have a titanium plate in my brain because they essentially had to cut a patch of my skull open, or not in my brain, but on my skull. They had to cut a patch of my skull open, go in and remove the tissue that way. And like when he explained it to me, he was like, "Oh, we'll make a little incision behind your ear and blah, blah, blah. And I explicitly asked, like, well, I need to have a plate installed. And he's like, oh, no, like, we'll probably pack it with the bone that we take out. But, you shouldn't have to have a plate and all this other stuff. Nah, that's not what happened. So I stayed in the hospital to recover for like 3 days. And then I came home and like they made it seem like this, like I've never really had surgery. So I had surgery on my shoulder back in 2019, just to do like some debridement. And so there were like 4 little incisions with these little bitty sutures that like self-dissolved, didn't need to get removed. No big deal. Like, yes, I was in pain, but it wasn't like that. The only other surgery I'd ever had was to have my wisdom teeth removed. So this was like, what the heck? And they were like, oh no, you should be fine within a week. No. I was pretty much on my butt for at least 2 weeks, and it took months for me to feel like I was anywhere near normal again. So I got the surgery done at the end of June. I didn't get all of my pathology results until the end of July-ish, maybe. I don't really remember. But I do know like a few weeks after the doctor called to talk to me, he's like, yeah, it's brain cancer. And I was like, oh, not really what I was thinking. Just very surprised. And I guess this whole story is to say like something that seemed so very benign, like something that didn't seem like a big deal, that was easily attributed to something else, ended up being life-changing. My cancer is considered a high-grade aggressive form of brain cancer. It's called an astrocytoma, grade 3, also called an anaplastic astrocytoma. And the crazy thing about this one is, or I guess not crazy, but it does not have well-defined borders, and it is referred to as diffused. So it is like intertwined with the healthy tissue. And so that's why they can't remove it, on top of the fact that it's in a very sensitive area. So it's in the motor area of my cerebellum, as well as touching my brainstem, 2 things that they don't want to touch with surgery. And so, I'm stuck with this thing. But when it comes to you, your body, your feelings, whatever, never let a person say that you are making things up or exaggerating. You know how you feel the most. And, seek the answers that will help you figure out what's going on. Like, I'm grateful that I am that type of person. Like, I don't like unanswered questions. And so I will absolutely continue to look for the answers until I find them. But I know that there's some people that will just accept what is told to them, and go about their business as usual. And everything is not a big deal, right? Like, this isn't to say to be worried and be anxious about every little thing that happens in life, but just be cognizant, be aware, and be okay with asking questions.